Have you ever been around someone with just an almost unbelievable sense of self-importance? You know the type, the person who just knows they're the smartest, the most special person in the room, maybe despite all the evidence.
Yeah, absolutely. Or maybe you've looked at history, looked at leaders, and just wondered, how could they commit such devastating acts on a global scale?
Exactly. What if we told you that these things, these individual quirks and these massive historical conflicts, what if they actually sprang from the same, fundamental human drive?
Well, welcome to the deep dive. Today, we are really plunging into a fascinating analysis of human megalomania.
Right.
And we're not just talking about it as some dramatic word for a big ego. No, this is about a deeply rooted scientific and philosophical force. It shapes our lives.
So our mission today is to really unpack it, right?
Yeah.
Look at its origins, how it shows up, and what this powerful impulse really means for you, for your relationships, and, well, for the world.
Precisely. And we're drawing from a really compelling source today, human megalomania, an AI-driven scientific and philosophical analysis.
An AI-driven analysis. Interesting.
Yeah, it's a multidisciplinary report, a real deep dive in itself. It dissects this whole phenomenon from its clinical roots, digs into the philosophical underpinnings, and traces its societal impacts.
So get ready. Your understanding of power, ambition, maybe even human nature itself might just get fundamentally reframed after this.
Yeah, I think it might. To really get our arms around this megalomaniacal impulse, we first need to be clear on what we mean.
Okay.
Historically, the term megalomania, it comes from ancient Greek, literally large madness.
Large madness. Wow.
Yeah. And early psychiatry, people like Kraepelin back in the early 20th century, they used terms like paranoid megalomania, often linking it to conditions like neurosyphilis back then.
But today, if you went to a clinic, megalomania isn't like the formal diagnosis you get, is it?
No, that's right. Its symptoms, they're largely covered by what we now call narcissistic personality disorder, or NPD.
Yeah.
Yeah, NPD. It describes this pervasive, lifelong pattern, exaggerated self-importance, an excessive, almost, insatiable need for admiration, and a deeply diminished ability to truly empathize with other people's feelings.
Right.
Now, for our discussion today, the report uses this dual terminology, which I think is helpful. NPD for the specific clinical diagnosis and its traits.
Got it.
But megalomania to capture that bigger picture, that underlying, often destructive drive for, and sometimes delusion of, ultimate power.
Ah, okay. So it lets us be specific, but also broad.
Exactly. Clinically grounded, philosophically expansive.
So if you're picturing this kind of personality, what does it actually look like? The report details 4 core features, right? And I bet you've seen these. First, grandiosity.
That's the big one, the hallmark. It's this inflated, sometimes almost delusional sense of superiority, of omnipotence even.
It's not just confidence then.
No, it's a belief in one's own specialness, often with these elaborate fantasies of, unlimited success or brilliance, believing they're fundamentally above everyone else.
Okay, what's next?
Second, there's a profound need for admiration. Now, despite that outward grandiosity, the self underneath is surprisingly fragile.
Really?
Oh, yeah. It constantly demands external validation. It's like a bottomless pit needing to be filled just to regulate a very unstable sense of self-worth.
And if they don't get it?
Well, if they don't get the special favors or the constant praise they believe they deserve, they can become deeply unhappy or often quite angry. Volatile.
Okay, so grandiosity, need for admiration.
Yeah.
What else?
Then there's a really striking lack of empathy. And this isn't just, not caring much. It's a profound inability or maybe unwillingness to truly recognize or understand what others are feeling.
Like an emotional blind spot.
Kind of, yeah. And chillingly, this is what allows them to exploit people without guilt, without remorse.
Wow. Okay. And the fourth one?
Entitlement. This shows up as an unreasonable expectation of, especially favorable treatment, automatic compliance with their demands.
Like the rules don't apply to them.
Exactly. They genuinely believe they deserve privileges. They often look down on anyone they see as unimportant. The rules are for other people, not for them.
When you trace the idea, it feels like there's a clear path, right? From ancient Greek ideas like hubris.
Yeah. That excessive pride leading to a downfall.
For Freud's ideas about omnipotence in kids and then landing on modern NPD.
Absolutely. And it's important to realize NPD isn't just one thing. Research points to 2 main, almost contradictory ways it shows up: grandiose and vulnerable.
Right, so the grandiose narcissist, that's probably what most people picture first.
Often, yeah. Overtly arrogant, extroverted, dominant. They actively chase status and admiration, can be quite charming, actually, at first. But they're also prone to antagonism and really intense fits of rage when they feel challenged or slighted.
And the other type, vulnerable.
The vulnerable narcissist. This is more defensive, fragile. The grandiosity is there, but it's often covert, hidden. It's masking deep insecurity, shame, hypersensitivity to criticism. Often leads to introversion, maybe passive aggression.
So they can look quite different on the surface.
Very different. But here's the crucial thing. These aren't always two separate people. An individual with NPD can actually fluctuate between these presentations.
So someone could seem really grandiose 1 minute.
And then collapse into vulnerable shame or rage the next. Yeah. This internal sort of back and forth explains a lot of the chaos they bring to relationships and decisions.
Okay, let's zoom out a bit then. The report really stresses that this impulse isn't just someone choosing to be bad, right? It's rooted deeper than that in biology.
Absolutely. It's presented as a complex biopsychosocial phenomenon. That means it involves our genes, our minds, and our environment. It's not just a moral failing.
So the old nature versus nurture question, what do we know about narcissism? Is it learned or inherited?
Well, twin studies have shed a lot of light on this. Comparing identical twins who share 100% of their genes with fraternal twins who share about half.
Right, that classic method.
Yeah. And the consensus is pretty strong. Narcissism is substantially heritable. Genetic contributions often range from, say, 40% up to nearly 80% in some studies. One big Norwegian twin study put NPD's heritability around 64%.
64%? That's significant.
It is. And interestingly, it seems grandiose narcissism is more strongly tied to genetics than the vulnerable type.
Okay. So vulnerable narcissism might be more shaped by early experiences.
That seems to be the trend, yeah. It appears more influenced by those early environmental factors. It's a key distinction.
And what about the brain itself? Neurobiology.
Yeah, that gives us more clues. We don't have the exact causal pathways mapped out perfectly yet, but there is a clearer link emerging between brain function and the core motivations of narcissism.
Like that intense drive for status and power.
Exactly. That drive and the tendency towards aggression seem rooted in specific neural circuits. The report talks about the limbic system, the prefrontal cortex, the striatum areas involved in reward, motivation, impulse control.
So like a glitch in the reward system maybe, fueling that hunger for status.
Potentially, yeah. And there's research on specific gene variations, like the MAOA gene, that affect how our brains handle things like serotonin, which impacts mood and aggression. This could link to the impulsive rage we sometimes see. It points to concrete neurobiological mechanisms.
And this feels really important. Genetics aren't destiny, right?
Absolutely. Critical point. Thank you for emphasizing that. There's no single narcissism gene. It's more like inheriting a constellation of genetic predispositions.
Like tendencies towards aggression, maybe, or finding it hard to tolerate distress.
Exactly. Things that create a vulnerability. But whether that potential actually gets switched on, so to speak, depends heavily on the interplay with the environment, especially during childhood.
So parenting really matters here.
Immensely. The research links NPD risk to parent-child dynamics at the extremes. Either too much adoration, the child is perfect, a genius, constantly praised regardless of reality.
Or the opposite, too much criticism.
Yes, or harsh criticism, especially when parental reactions are inconsistent or don't match the child's actual experiences. Things like overprotective parenting, neglectful parenting, overindulgent parenting, they can all contribute, as can early life trauma, rejection, abuse.
It really reframes it, doesn't it? Away from just blaming the person towards understanding it as a complex condition with deep roots.
Precisely. It moves away from simple moral condemnation.
Okay, so we've got the clinical picture, the biology.
Yeah.
Now, the report introduces something else, a philosophical engine, you called it.
Yes. This provides a really remarkable unifying framework for understanding the whole thing. Friedrich Nietzsche's concept of the will to power.
Nietzsche. Now, that's a concept that gets misunderstood a lot, isn't it? People often think it just means wanting to dominate others.
Exactly. It's often mistaken for a simple lust for political control or crude domination. But Nietzsche saw it very differently. He proposed it as a fundamental, pre-rational, intrinsic drive in all living things.
All living things, not just humans.
Everything. The drive to expand influence, to grow, overcome resistance, discharge strength. He thought it was even more fundamental than the will to survive. He famously said, "Wherever I found a living thing, I found there the will to power."
Wow. Okay, so how does the report connect this to megalomania?
It draws a crucial distinction Nietzsche made, though he didn't use these exact terms consistently this way. Think of craft that's raw, unchanneled force, like a tyrant's crude domination. That's the megalomaniac using their will to power destructively.
Okay, raw force, craft.
But Nietzsche didn't praise that. He valued Macht. This is the will to power channeled, sublimated, controlled, focused on creative activity and, crucially, self-mastery.
So the goal isn't power over others, but power over oneself.
Precisely. Think of an artist channeling their will into a will to create, or a scientist directing it into a will to truth. That's Macht. That's the higher, healthy expression.
And Nietzsche applied this everywhere.
Universally. Psychologically, he thought it explained all human motivation, even acts that look altruistic. Like, kindness could be, maybe subtly, about expanding one's feeling of power by making others indebted or dependent.
Interesting perspective.
And he extended it to moral systems. He contrasted master morality, the morality of the strong, the noble, who create their own values, defining good as what's like them, proud, powerful. This kind of resonates with the grandiose narcissist, doesn't it?
It does, yeah.
Then there's slave morality. This arises from the weak, the resentful. They can't compete on the master's terms, so they perform a revaluation of values. They label the master's strengths evil and their own qualities humility, pity, patience as good.
And that connects to...
You can see parallels with vulnerable narcissism, using morality defensively, perhaps masking resentment or feelings of inadequacy.
And he took it even further, beyond psychology.
Oh, yes. Biologically, metaphysically. He saw the will to power as the engine driving all life. A fish eating a smaller fish, a plant growing towards the sun, constant striving, overcoming. Ultimately, he proposed it as the fundamental nature of reality itself.
That famous quote.
This world is the will to power and nothing besides. And you yourselves are also this will to power and nothing besides. It's a powerful, almost dizzying idea.
So for Nietzsche, the healthy path isn't suppressing this will, but channeling it.
Exactly. Through self-overcoming. Directing the will to power inward, mastering impulses, refining oneself, creating something greater, not for external applause, but for internal growth. That's the path towards his ideal of the Übermensch, the overman.
Whereas the megalomaniac tries to control the world.
Without first mastering themselves, yes. The Übermensch masters the self and then creatively shapes their world.
So this Nietzschean framework really ties it all together, the biology, the psychology, even history.
It does. The genetic predispositions are like the raw craft. The different forms of narcissism are strategies for expressing the will to power. And historical talents. That's the will to power running rampant on a societal scale, totally unsublimated, lacking self-mastery. It's a remarkably coherent explanation.
Okay, let's shift focus outward then. What happens when this powerful individual drive meets the collective? History certainly gives us some stark examples, doesn't it?
It certainly does. The destructive potential is most terrifyingly clear when megalomania gets hold of political power.
You mentioned ancient Rome earlier.
Yes. Emperors like Tiberius, Caligula, who literally thought he was a living god and demanded worship, Nero, infamous for cruelty, matricide, they're ancient archetypes of this destructive drive.
And this internal drive often spilled outward, didn't it?
Yeah.
Into massive building projects.
Exactly. What's sometimes called gigantomania, building superfluously large architecture, huge engineering projects. Think of the Egyptian pyramids, the grand scale of imperial Rome, designed in part to awe people, make them feel insignificant compared to the ruler's power.
Even propaganda could reflect this.
Oh, yes. The report mentions Roman Empress Julia Domna given unprecedented divine titles. You could see that as a kind of maternal megalomania, an overblown assertion of influence through status.
And in the 20th century, the scale just becomes almost unimaginable.
Truly terrifying. Adolf Hitler, often diagnosed retrospectively with narcissistic megalomania, his delusional self-belief fueled a world war and the Holocaust, and his plans with Albert Speer for a monumental New Berlin, classic gigantomania.
And then there was Stalin.
Joseph Stalin, his reign of terror, the Great Purge, catastrophic famines. Estimates are over 20 million deaths. And again, you see the gigantomania in those massive Soviet industrial complexes, imposing his will on the landscape.
And Mao Zedong in China.
Described as fanatical and megalomaniacal, policies like the Great Leap Forward, the Cultural Revolution, the death toll estimates range wildly, from 49 up to 78 million people. It's staggering.
And the list goes on. Pol Pot, Idi Amin.
Pol Pot in Cambodia, Idi Amin in Uganda, Bokassa in the Central African Republic, Masias Nguema in Equatorial Guinea. all marked by psychopathic violence, delusions of grandeur. And look at North Korea, Kim Il-sung, creating a dynastic cult of personality, the Juche ideology expressed through enormous monuments. It persists today.
So is this impulse still around in politics now?
Oh, absolutely. The report suggests it's very much present. You see it in populist leaders cultivating intense cult of personality, demanding unquestioning loyalty.
Like the Mad GA movement is mentioned as an example.
Yes, presented as an example of that dynamic, or leaders making, frankly, baseless claims of having a divine destiny. The Ethiopian PM Abiy Ahmed reportedly claiming his mother prophesied his kingship is cited.
So what allows these figures to rise? It's not just them, is it? It's the situation.
That's a crucial point. Megalomaniacal leaders don't just emerge in a vacuum. They're often enabled, even created, by societal conditions. Times of intense crisis fear, economic hardship, national humiliation make populations really vulnerable.
Vulnerable to someone promising easy answers, projecting certainty.
Exactly. Vulnerable to a narcissistic leader who projects absolute certainty and a grandiose vision. It creates this dangerous feedback loop. Society in crisis elevates the megalomaniac.
Who then might keep the crisis going to stay in power.
Often, yes. They perpetuate crisis to consolidate control. So mitigating this threat isn't just about vetting leaders. It's about building resilient, stable, just societies that aren't so susceptible in the first place.
Now, while the biology in that will to power might be universal, how it gets expressed seems really shaped by culture, doesn't it?
Profoundly. Culture acts like a volume knob. It can amplify or mute narcissistic traits. It sets the norms for what's acceptable, especially regarding gender roles.
The classic comparison is individualism versus collectivism.
Right. The traditional view was individualistic cultures, like the U.S., Western Europe, they emphasize personal achievement, standing out, so they probably foster more narcissism.
Whereas collectivistic cultures, say in East Asia, prioritize group harmony, so they might discourage it more.
That was the thinking, and there's evidence supporting it. There was a fascinating natural experiment with German reunification. West Germans, from the more individualistic culture, scored significantly higher on grandiose narcissism than East Germans from the more collectivistic background.
Interesting.
And a big meta-analysis found that the link between grandiose narcissism and feeling good about yourself, well-being, is stronger in individualistic countries. Suggests a kind of person-culture fit. The culture rewards those traits.
But it's not always that simple, is it?
No, recent research is complicating the picture. A large survey across different world regions actually found some traditionally collectivistic cultures in Asia and Africa reported higher levels on certain facets, like leadership authority or grandiose exhibitionism.
Really? Why would that be?
The researchers speculate it could be globalization, the internet fostering more individualistic ways of seeing the self, even in those societies. So it's dynamic, it's evolving. Not quite so black and white anymore.
And what about gender differences?
Well, research consistently finds that men, on average, score higher on grandiose narcissism and are more likely to be diagnosed with NPD.
Why is that?
The difference seems largely driven by men scoring higher on things like exploitative entitlement facets and leadership authority. Interestingly, there's little gender difference in exhibitionism or vanity aspects.
What about the vulnerable type?
We see no significant gender differences generally. Some researchers theorize that women might express narcissistic traits more covertly, perhaps to avoid clashing with traditional feminine stereotypes.
So social roles play a part.
Very likely. Social role theory suggests patriarchal societies tend to tolerate, even encourage, dominant assertive behaviors in men, linking some narcissistic symptoms to traditional masculine stereotypes, while socializing women more towards communal roles. Culture powerfully shapes how it's expressed, rewarded, or punished, even if it doesn't create the underlying predisposition.
This brings us to something really fascinating in the report. The megalomaniac's relationship with rules, it seems peculiar.
It really is. They seem to just disregard everyone else's rules while being obsessed with imposing their own.
Why do societies even need rules in the first place? Seems obvious, but maybe worth stating.
Fundamentally, for predictability, for resolving disputes peacefully, for cooperation. Without rules, formal or informal, society just descends into chaos. Even basic norms of reciprocity, as anthropologists like Malinowski showed, are essential for social cohesion.
And law, specifically. Legal anthropology sees it as more than just statutes.
Right. It's a cultural system deeply tied to power. It reflects a society's values, its local knowledge, and crucially, most societies have legal pluralism.
Meaning multiple legal systems operating at once.
Exactly. State law, religious law, customary community rules, even unwritten family rules, they all coexist, interact, sometimes conflict.
And law is always tied to power.
Inseparable. Creating laws, enforcing them, that is an assertion of authority. Legislating is imposing a worldview.
Okay, so how does the narcissist fit into this?
Here's the really striking part. The report describes how a narcissist essentially tries to establish their own personal, hyper-authoritarian legal system within their sphere of influence, family, workplace, relationship.
Like their own little kingdom.
Precisely. They act like a rogue sovereign. They reject external norms, external laws, and impose their own arbitrary, customary law. Only their rules matter.
So what happens when someone pushes back, breaks their rules?
They don't see it as a simple disagreement or a different opinion. They see it as sedition, an attack on their legitimate authority.
So conflicts become jurisdictional battles.
Exactly. The other person isn't just disagreeing. They're challenging the very foundation of the narcissist's self-created reality, their personal legal code. It makes conflict incredibly intense and often irresolvable on rational terms.
Okay, so turning that around. Why do most people, most of the time, actually follow rules? And why are megalomaniacs seemingly exempt in their own minds?
Let's start with obedience. Stanley Milgram's experiments in the 60s were chilling, weren't they?
The electric shock experiments?
Yeah.
Deeply unsettling.
They showed how ordinary people could administer what they thought were painful, even dangerous shocks, just because an authority figure in a lab coat told them to.
How did Milgram explain that?
He proposed his agency theory. He suggested people can shift from an autonomous state, feeling responsible for their actions, into an agentic state.
Agentic state?
Yeah, where they see themselves as just an agent carrying out the authority's wishes. Responsibility gets displaced onto the authority figure, which lessens the moral strain of doing something uncomfortable or wrong.
Okay, so that's obedience. What about deviance, rule breaking in general?
Well, psychologically, factors like impulsivity, maybe low conscientiousness, or growing up with inconsistent rules can play a role. Sociologically, you have theories like strain theory.
That's the gap between goals and means.
Right. Deviance arises from that disconnect. Conflict theory sees it as resistance against inequality. And labeling theory suggests being labeled deviant can actually push someone further into that role.
So how does the megalomaniac fit into this picture? They're not really reacting to strain or labels in the same way, are they?
Not at all. It's a profound contrast. The megalomaniac acts as if they are the ultimate authority figure. They expect others to enter that agentic state relative to them. Just follow their orders.
And when someone doesn't, asserts their own autonomy.
It's not seen as a reasonable disagreement. It's insubordination. It triggers that disproportionate narcissistic rage because it challenges their authority. And conversely, they see themselves as perpetually autonomous, uniquely exempt from anyone else's rules. They are the lawgiver, never the subject.
So their rule breaking isn't about social pressure. It's core to who they are.
Exactly. It's a direct expression of their personality, fundamentally rooted in that profound sense of entitlement and that lack of empathy we talked about earlier.
Narcissistic entitlement.
Yeah.
It's more than just feeling deserving.
Oh, yeah. It's an unshakable belief that they are special, that they deserve privileges, that they are exempt from the rules that bind ordinary people. It's often a defense mechanism for a very fragile ego underneath. But when they break a rule, they feel utterly justified. They genuinely believe they're above it.
And this fuels actual behavior, like cheating.
Consistently. Studies show students higher in narcissistic traits are more likely to cheat academically. Why? To demonstrate superiority, get validation. They often lack guilt and are masters at rationalizing it away.
The report mentioned something about inoculating them against that.
Yeah, an interesting finding. If you kind of prepare them to question their own justifications beforehand, it can actually reduce the cheating tendency. Makes them think twice about their rationalizations.
What about in relationships?
Narcissism is linked to a greater tendency towards infidelity. That insatiable need for validation drives them to seek new sources of admiration. The lack of empathy means they don't fully grasp or perhaps care about the devastation it causes their partner.
Plus the entitlement.
Right. They might feel they have a right to multiple partners. And for some, the thrill of the deception itself, getting away with it, provides a hit of power and cleverness.
And at work.
Predicts counterproductive behaviors, theft, fraud, sabotage, abusive supervision. But there's a twist. Sometimes it leads to creative deviance.
Creative deviance.
Yeah, where they might defy orders or bend rules to pursue a novel idea they believe in because they think they know better, that the rules don't apply to their brilliant insight. Of course, at its extreme, it leads to aggression, antisocial behavior, even assault.
You know, it sounds like the act of breaking the rule itself is rewarding for them.
That's a key insight. Successfully violating a norm, especially if they get away with it, is potent narcissistic supply. It's tangible proof of their grandiosity. See? I am special. I am smarter. The rules don't bind me.
It's intoxicating.
Highly. It reinforces that core belief, which explains why they might commit even pointless transgressions, like shoplifting something they don't need. The prize isn't the item, it's the feeling of successful defiance.
This really leads to the question, how do they do that? How do they commit harm, break rules, and still see themselves as good, special people?
That's where the internal psychological mechanisms come in. The report highlights two key processes: cognitive distortions and moral disengagement.
Okay, break those down. Cognitive distortions.
These are ingrained errors in thinking, patterns that protect the ego and reduce that uncomfortable feeling, cognitive dissonance, when actions clash with self-image. For example, polarized thinking.
Black and white thinking.
Exactly. Seeing things in all or nothing terms. People are either all good or all bad. This fuels that rapid swing from idealizing someone to completely devaluing them. No nuance.
Okay.
The victim stance and blaming others, they're masters at twisting situations to cast themselves as the innocent, injured party, even when they cause the harm. This then justifies their anger or retaliation. Personalization, interpreting everything as being about them. If something bad happens, it's a personal attack. If someone's upset, it must be because of them. And grandiosity and minimization, constantly exaggerating their own positives while dismissing or downplaying anyone else's successes to maintain that feeling of superiority.
Okay, so those are distortions in thinking. What about moral disengagement? That sounds ominous.
It is. This concept comes from Albert Bandura. It describes the specific psychological maneuvers people use to switch off their moral self-condemnation, allowing them to act inhumanely without feeling bad about it. There are 8 main mechanisms.
8. Okay, let's hear them.
Moral justification. Reframing harmful conduct as serving some higher purpose. Think necessary evil or fighting a war for freedom while committing atrocities.
Right.
Euphemistic labeling. Using sanitized, neutral language to disguise harmful actions. Collateral damage instead of killing civilians. Servicing the target instead of bombing. Makes it sound clean, technical, advantageous comparison. Making one's own harmful behavior seem minor by comparing it to something much worse. Sure, I did X, but look at what they did.
Minimizing by comparison.
Exactly. Displacement of responsibility. Blaming actions on an authority figure. I was only following orders. That classic Milgram defense, diffusion of responsibility, spreading responsibility across a group so no single person feels accountable. Think corporate boards making unethical decisions or mob violence. Everyone was doing it.
Right, safety in numbers.
Disregarding or distorting consequences. Ignoring or minimizing the harm caused by one's actions. Easier to do when the victims are distant or unseen, like a CEO firing people via email.
Okay, nearly there.
Dehumanization. Stripping victims of human qualities, calling them vermin, insects, savages. This makes it psychologically easier to inflict suffering.
Dealing.
And finally, attribution of blame. Blaming the victims themselves for their misfortune. They brought it on themselves or they deserved it.
Wow. When you lay them out like that, you see them everywhere, don't you? In politics, in history, even in personal conflicts.
You absolutely do. Leaders using sanitized language for war, blaming victims. They're using these tools, consciously or not, to maintain their heroic self-image while causing harm. It allows them to live in their own twisted narrative.
So this creates a kind of feedback loop, doesn't it?
A truly destructive psychological feedback loop, yes. The core drive for power, the grandiosity, leads to a transgression. That should trigger shame or dissonance.
But it gets neutralized.
Right. Neutralized by the cognitive distortions and moral disengagement. And the successful neutralization provides that intoxicating hit of narcissistic supply, reinforcing the grandiose self. See, I am special. I'm above the rules.
Which then fuels the drive for more power.
Exactly. It strengthens the drive, making more severe transgressions more likely. It's a self-perpetuating cycle, spiraling deeper into delusion and often causing greater harm.
The report draws a really surprising parallel here between this individual psychological loop and science.
Yes, it's a fascinating point. It connects the megalomaniac's quest for ultimate personal control to humanity's collective scientific quest for a theory of everything.
A theory of everything, like in physics, unifying all the fundamental forces.
Precisely. Or in philosophy, the even grander ambition of an all-encompassing explanation for reality itself, the kind of system-building metaphysics from Plato to Hegel.
What drives that scientific quest? It's not just curiosity, is it?
The report suggests it's also fueled by deep aesthetic and metaphysical drives, a belief in the underlying unity, simplicity, elegance of the universe, a profound desire to impose rational order on chaos.
So you can see that quest for ultimate knowledge as a form of the will to power.
A collective, sublimated expression of it, yes. The drive to overcome ignorance, to achieve total intellectual mastery over reality. It's the will to power channeled creatively, as mocked.
But there's a paradox, isn't there, with a theory of everything?
The profound logical impasse, highlighted by philosopher Nicholas Richer. For a theory to explain everything, it must also explain itself. But that violates the principle of non-circularity in logic.
So an ultimate theory would have to be self-justifying, a closed loop.
Exactly, a self-substantiating system. And this, the report argues, is a stunning parallel to the megalomaniac's psyche.
How so?
Their worldview is pathologically self-referential. Their grandiosity is justified by their feelings of grandiosity. Their entitlement is justified by their belief that they're special. It's a completely closed, circular system.
The theory of themselves.
A comprehensive, final theory of themselves that answers only to itself. But like that paradoxical toe, it's ultimately a delusion because it's ungrounded. It's a closed loop with no anchor in external reality or shared truth.
So the scientist seeking the final equation and the dictator seeking world domination. Reflections of the same impulse.
In a profound sense, yes. Macrocosmic reflections. One is sublimation, mocked, channeled creativity. The other is raw pathology, craft, crude domination. Any system, scientific or personal, that claims to be its own ultimate justification is, the report suggests, fundamentally unmoored from truth.
Wow. Okay, so scaling this up again. If this drive is so destructive individually, what happens when it infects entire groups or nations? That's where things get truly catastrophic, right?
Absolutely. Authoritarian leaders often weaponize ideology, religion, nationalism, use them as tools for social control to legitimize their power.
Like Marx's opium of the people idea.
Exactly. Certain ideologies can pacify people, justify the status quo. The megalomaniacal leader often positions themselves as a kind of messiah, demanding followers enter that agentic state, give up their moral autonomy.
The Jonestown Massacre comes to mind.
A horrific example. Followers drinking the poison Kool-Aid on command. A testament to that extreme ideological control and the dangers of the agentic shift.
And a key strategy is often creating an enemy, an outgroup.
A classic tactic. Incite intergroup conflict by manufacturing an outgroup threat, and then apply those moral disengagement techniques we discussed.
Dehumanize them, blame them for everything?
Precisely. Portray them as subhuman, attribute all societal problems to them. We saw it with Nazi Germany targeting Jewish people and other groups. We see variations in modern populism, demonizing immigrants or minorities.
And the ultimate goal can be erasing the other culture entirely.
Often, yes, because the very existence of a different culture, a different way of being, can feel like a narcissistic injury to the megalomaniac or the narcissistic group. It contradicts their belief in their own absolute superiority.
So the violence, cultural genocide, destroying sacred sites, colonialism, it's like collective narcissistic rage.
You could frame it that way. A desperate, destructive attempt to eliminate anything that challenges the delusion of omnipotence, to make the world conform to their single narrow vision.
Okay, after exploring all this, this darkness, really, you have to ask, what can we do? How can we as individuals, as a society, maybe raise kids differently, foster healthier traits?
That's the crucial question, isn't it? And the report offers clear, evidence-based answers. Since NPD seems to stem from that mix of genetic predisposition and environmental factors, the strategy is to directly counteract the roots of pathological narcissism.
Which means fostering
empathy, intellectual humility, and critical thinking. These are presented as the core antidotes.
So in parenting, avoid those extremes we talked about. Neglect on one hand, overindulgence or excessive criticism on the other.
Exactly. Find a sensitive balance. Offer genuine praise, but also constructive criticism, tuned to the child's actual experiences. Foster secure attachment, let the child feel loved for who they are, not just as an extension of the parent's ego or some kind of trophy.
And fostering empathy, the direct antidote to that narcissistic indifference. How do you do that?
Model it yourself, first and foremost. Talk openly about feelings, yours, theirs, characters and stories. Label emotions. Actively encourage perspective taking. How do you think your friend felt when that happened? Expose them to diverse stories, diverse people, build that muscle.
And intellectual humility. That's about recognizing you don't know everything.
Precisely. Recognizing knowledge is incomplete, that your beliefs might be wrong. And critical thinking, the ability to analyze information objectively, question assumptions, directly counters that rigid, self-serving, narcissistic mindset.
So how do you encourage this?
Encourage genuine questions. Don't just give answers. Teach kids how to find information, how to evaluate sources like lateral searching online. Expose them to different viewpoints, maybe through respectful debates or reading primary sources. Focus on the process of discovery, not just getting the right answer.
It sounds like giving them a psychological toolkit.
That's a great way to put it. A toolkit to help them channel that innate will to power constructively towards connection and understanding, rather than self-absorption and domination.
And what about the bigger picture, society? What recommendations come out of this analysis for cultural and political health?
The report synthesizes it all into some clear recommendations. First, when selecting leaders, we need to get much better at vetting against megalomania. Look past the superficial charisma.
What should we look for instead?
Prioritize credibility, a track record, evidence of servant leadership. Do they actually uplift others or just seek power for themselves? Assess their real capacity. Can they negotiate, influence complex situations, manage difficult realities, or just issue commands?
And distinguish between principles and just policies they adopt to get elected.
Yes. Are they guided by core moral principles like justice, compassion, or just shifting opportunistically? And crucially, insist on data-driven governance. Leaders who engage with facts, with evidence, not just ideology or their personal gut feelings.
What about fostering a healthier culture overall?
A big one is actively shifting away from hyper-individualism and cutthroat competition towards valuing cooperation, integrity, humility, egalitarianism. Remember that German reunification study? It suggests cultural shifts can buffer against grandiose narcissism.
That makes sense. What else?
Something really interesting. Cultivating connectedness to nature. The report highlights this as the single most significant predictor of pro-environmental behavior.
Really? Why nature?
Fostering direct experience with the natural world, teaching an ecological worldview, seeing humanity as part of the web of life, not its supreme master, seems vital. It counters that anthropocentric arrogance that mirrors individual narcissism, essential for sustainability.
And finally, protecting our institutions.
Absolutely vital. Strengthening democratic institutions, a free press, an independent judiciary, educational systems that genuinely promote critical thinking and intellectual humility. A critically minded, engaged populace is the best defense against tyranny and the unchecked will to power.
So the report's ultimate takeaway seems to be, megalomania isn't just a personality disorder, it's central to so many of our biggest challenges.
That's the powerful conclusion, yes. The same underlying pathological will to power manifests individually as narcissism, abuse, and collectively as tyranny, war, even environmental exploitation. A culture fostering grandiosity and entitlement will inevitably treat others and the planet itself as objects to be dominated and discarded.
So what does this all mean for you listening right now?
The path to a balanced universe, as the report frames it, is inseparable from cultivating a balanced human psyche within ourselves and our societies. All these strategies, personal, parental, societal, are facets of one unified, vital project.
But drive it too.
To consciously choose to channel that powerful human will to power away from destructive domination and towards creative self-mastery, compassionate connection, and responsible stewardship of ourselves, each other, and the world.
Wow. We've really covered a lot of ground today, journeyed through this intricate landscape of megalomania, from the clinical diagnosis, the biology, the philosophy.
Its historical impact, how culture shapes it.
You should now have a much deeper, more comprehensive understanding of this powerful human impulse, realizing it's not just a simple flaw, but this complex interplay of genes, environment, and that fundamental drive for power. Nietzsche talked about a drive that, in some form, lives within all of us.
So as you reflect on this deep dive, here's a final thought to maybe mull over. If the ultimate destructive expression of the human will to power can be this deluded attempt to force reality itself to conform to a disordered mind, then what active steps will you take in your own life to channel your will to power inward? Towards self-mastery, towards compassionate connection, shaping your world, your relationships into a work of art, perhaps, rather than just a reflection of delusion?
The choice, as always, is yours.
This is DigitView.